Chapter 4. A Problem Child's Surefire Strategy for Winning Magic Battles. Louis stood at the lectern in front of the practical magecraft classroom and lightly lifted the short staff in his hand. Mac Reagan, the old practical magecraft teacher, stood beside him and quietly announced, "Fireball. Power 5. No upper limit. Fixed coordinates." He was instructing Louis to make as many small, low-powered fireballs as he possibly could. Louis concentrated, then chanted. Chants were the blueprints of magecraft. They defined the factors of a spell, such as its power, form, quantity, position, and range of travel. First, you decided these factors, then you wove your mana into the corresponding shape accounting for them, and your spell was complete. Coordinate position fixed, attribute conversion, partitions, molding. While deploying his magecraft formula, he used a shorter chant that cut out some of the unnecessary stuff. That caused a stir to ripple through the classroom. "Hey, is that quick chanting?" "No kidding. He just enrolled this month." A quick chant was a shortened version of a normal chant. It was a difficult technique to use, requiring deep, fundamental knowledge of magecraft formulae. "Way too early to be impressed, folks." Louis grinned fearlessly, then cast his spell. The point of this practice session was to produce fireballs. Inexperienced students might only manage one, while those more familiar with the technique could hope for 2 or 3. The best so far had been a boy named Adolphe Ferron, who had produced 10. But with a wave of his staff, Louis created 15 of them around himself. And then, while keeping them all in place, he did a second quick chant and created another set of 15. It was said that in general, mags could maintain only 2 spells at a time, but in truth, just keeping 2 going was no easy feat. Neither quick chanting nor simultaneous maintenance were things a kid who just enrolled a month ago should have been able to pull off. His classmates' faces were full of shock, fear, awe, and envy. But Louis ignored them all and looked over at Rosalie, who sat by the windows. "How do you like that?" Louis sniffed pridefully. For some reason, Rosalie's mouth opened and closed. She was moving her hands around, apparently trying to tell him something. And clearly not amazing or wonderful. In fact, she looked panicked. "That's cute. But why's she doing that?" Louis narrowed his right eye and read her lips. "Look up." Maintaining his fireballs, he tilted his head back. Above him was a large sphere of water, big enough that it would take 2 adults to encircle it. Mac Reagan's specialty, water magecraft. "Ch-ph," the old teacher grunted. With a wave of his staff, he brought the water crashing down on Louis, extinguishing all the fireballs he'd created. Blurb, ah! Since he'd been looking up, the water caught him right in the face. The force of it sent Louis to the floor on his backside. "Watch it, lad. If you're going to do something major like that, do it outside. We wouldn't want to start a fire in here." "But you said no upper limit," shouted Louis, soaking wet and throwing spittle. Mac Reagan continued calmly. "In this classroom, half of that is enough. Part of being a mage is having the ability to alter your magecraft based on the situation." The bell chose that exact moment to ring, marking the end of class. Textbook and staff in hand, Mac Reagan headed toward the hall. "Oh, and one more thing. Miller, I want you to write a report on the quick chanting you used today." Why only me? His spell had been better than anyone else's. But now he was sopping wet and he had more homework. This was ridiculous. As Louis yapped and yelled, Mac Reagan simply said, "I'm looking forward to that report," and left the classroom. Louis, still soaked from Mac Reagan's ball of water, cleaned up the floor, then went outside for a moment to wring the moisture out of his uniform. Even so, it was still damp and heavy as he headed back to class. Up north, wearing wet clothes like this would have been tantamount to suicide, but it was warm here, so he didn't have to worry about dying. "I'm sure they'll dry eventually. I think." He was optimistic as he stepped into the classroom. All of the students inside turned to look at him. And yet none of them spoke to him. A month after his official enrollment at Minerva's, Louis's classmates treated him like he might explode at any moment. He was the commoner scholarship kid and the barbarian who went crazy in the cafeteria. Best not to interact with him. That seemed to be how they looked at him. But Louis had always intended to make that impression. That was why he acted the way he did, so he didn't really care. It was way better than being underestimated. Or so he'd thought, anyway. But as he walked among the desks, one of the boys stuck his leg out into the aisle. The boy had black hair and an unyielding expression. It was Adolf Ferren, the next best magecraft user in class after Louis. His bangs were always parted right down the middle, exposing his forehead. Louis secretly thought it looked like a snowfield. Up north, people compared large white things to snowfields a lot. Adolf probably wanted to trip him. Going around it would be easy, but Louis purposely stumbled over it. The boy's grin deepened. "Oh, sorry," he said. "My foot slipped." As Louis staggered, he put a hand on the table to his left, then jumped. He landed on Adolf's foot, stomping on it with all his might. "Gaia," the boy yelped. Louis smiled back. The expression was fierce and wild, like a carnivorous beast's. "Sorry," he said. "My foot slipped." Adolf glared at him with tears in his eyes, but Louis acted like nothing had happened and went back to his seat. That one's gonna be trouble. His little rampage on move-in day had encouraged most of the other students to keep their distance, but it seemed as though today's show of skill had made some of them envious. Adolf was nobility. He had excellent grades, especially in practical magecraft, where he was first in their year. He was always acting arrogant in class. Today, he'd created 10 fireballs. Louis had created 30 and had quick-chanted them, and he had maintained 2 spells at once. It was more than enough to wound Adolf's pride. At times like these, the ones with a little skill are always the most trouble. What a pain," he muttered, getting ready for their next class at his desk. A shadow fell across his hands. He looked up to see a dark brown-haired girl, Rosalie, staring at him. "Why didn't you change?" she asked. Who cares? I'm not cold enough to freeze to death. I'll dry off soon." "But what if you catch a cold first?" she said harshly. Louis sulked a little. His magecraft had been the best in their class, and yet he'd been soaked, had to write a report, and Rosalie was scolding him. This sucked. Yeah. I just have to take these off, right? Fine." He removed his cape and vest and hung them on the back of his chair. While he was at it, he took off his shirt, too. He had almost no fat on him, but he was well built. He had a sinewy body, like skin pulled over compressed muscle. It was a terrible mismatch with his effeminate face, and the female students averted their gazes at the sight, while the boys he'd beaten yelped. Adolf let out a disgusted groan. Rosalie, however, did none of those things. Her eyebrows arched in anger. "If you're going to change, do it in your dorm room," she snapped. "But if I go back now, I won't make it in time for our next class." "I don't care. Just go get changed. I'll talk to our next teacher about it, so don't worry." Rosalie wasn't budging an inch. Reluctantly, Louis got up. He was a troublemaker, to be sure, but he never cut classes or arrived late. He felt like it would be a waste to miss anything. "Fine. Guess I'll take a shortcut." He picked up his wet uniform and moved, not toward the hallway but toward the window. This second-story classroom was on the same side of the building as the covered walkway running to the lecture hall, and from here, he could drop down onto its roof. Louis set his foot on the window frame, then nimbly jumped out. Gideon Rutherford was grading quizzes at his desk in the faculty room. Mac Reagan, who sat next to him, sipped his tea and said, "About Miller." "What about him?" asked Rutherford, looking up. "What's he done now?" "Well, I'd heard he could use all the beginner-level spells. But I didn't realize he knew how to do simultaneous maintenance and quick chanting. Would you mind telling me things like that in advance next time?" Rutherford stopped grading and frowned. Mags were divided into ranks beginner, intermediate, and high. There were only a small handful of high mags. Simultaneous maintenance was on an intermediate level, and quick chanting That was something you couldn't necessarily expect even high mags to be able to use. I never taught him either of those things, he said. You didn't? Rutherford picked up his unlit pipe and twirled it around his fingers. He tended to do that whenever he was lost in thought. After the pipe had made about 2 full rotations, he dropped his voice. He used simultaneous maintenance and quick chanting, did he? He divided a fireball with quick chanting into 15 smaller ones. And he produced 2 sets at once. His formula connection was perfect, as were the fireball's stability and duration. I put them all out right away, of course. An impressive apprentice mage could maintain fireballs for maybe 3 seconds. Maintenance was always more difficult than the actual casting of a spell. It certainly wasn't something a kid who'd only enrolled a month ago should be able to pull off. When you told me he'd learned all of the beginner magecraft in the book, said Macregan, I almost didn't believe you. He certainly isn't an everyday apprentice, that boy. Everyone was evaluated for their strongest element, as well as for their mana capacity, upon enrolling at Minerva's. Louis's best element was wind, and his capacity was around 100, which was spectacular, considering the boy had only just started using magecraft. Mana capacity tended to increase the more you practiced, capping out at around 20 years old. Plus, Louis was in his growth spurt right now, so his capacity would only get higher. Macregan seemed to be thinking the same thing as Rutherford. Wind element users are particularly suited for combat. Maybe it's best we got him started on magic battle training early. You may be right. Magic battles were a type of combat that allowed the use of mana-based attacks, including both magecraft and magical items. Matches took place inside a special barrier that protected the participants from physical harm. Damage manifested only as a loss of mana. Some mags just wanted to do research, so magic battle classes were elective. Still, many students chose to take them anyway, since even prospective researchers could find work more easily if they had combat ability. Judging by Louis Miller's disposition and talents, he was well suited for magic battles. One day, he might even find a place in the Magic Corps, a group of elite mags who specialized in combat. Oh, are you talking about Miller? Someone said, interrupting their conversation. It was Allison, the law teacher. The cheerful man was in his early 20s, young compared to most of the faculty. He ran a hand through his blonde hair and smiled amicably. I was worried about him, what with all the rumors saying he was a terrible problem child. But they couldn't have been more wrong. He takes to his schoolwork earnestly. I wish the other kids sneaking naps in the middle of class would learn something from him. Many young students seemed to find law class boring. A lot of them would nap at their seat or play hooky. Allison must have taken a shine to Louis, since he was so zealous about his studies. He does all his homework so well, too, the teacher continued. I praised him for it once, and do you know how he replied? Gotta know the law to find all the loopholes. What a gutsy joke. Rutherford closed his mouth, pipe in one hand. Louis must have been hoping to find a way out of trouble for the next time he caused problems. What an impure motive for studying. At Allison's cheerful praise, a red-haired man of around 30 nodded. The magical creature studies teacher Redmond. We copied drawings of dragon models in class recently, and Miller was quite passionate about it. He drew the shapes of all the scales between their eyes, their weak point, with particular detail, as well as the spots where scales could be more easily torn off. He obviously wants to hunt them, thought Rutherford. Still, the teachers generally seemed to have a favorable impression of Louis. The boy misbehaved on a regular basis, but he had a ravenous appetite for learning. Minerva's was the top mage training institution in the kingdom of Riddil. How could anyone who taught there dislike such a studious kid? Even Macregan, who had just warned Rutherford about Louis, nodded, stroking his beard. He writes a good report. Allison, Redmond, and Macregan continued their lively discussion as Rutherford silently twirled his pipe. Meanwhile, a short old woman, Maga, the instructor for barrier techniques, straightened a pile of assignments on her desk with a clap-clap. I cannot bring myself to think highly of him, she said, with a hint of disgust. A scholarship student must be a model, a good example to other students. Throwing a fit, as he did on his first day here, is simply unacceptable. Maga wore round spectacles and a robe over a navy dress. If not for the robe, she would have been the image of a strict teacher at a girls' school. But even here at Minerva's, she was the harshest instructor regarding the students' behavior. Because of all of Louis's delinquent acts, she now viewed him as an enemy. In all honesty, Rutherford was glad to have a teacher like her around. The brat would get far too big for his britches otherwise. Earlier today, she complained, Louis Miller jumped out a window and ran down the roof of the connecting passage. Just unbelievable. Maga trailed off as her eyes fixed on something outside the window. The other teachers followed her gaze. And there he was, the impish boy himself, racing across the roof of a connecting passage, half naked. Maga opened the window. Louis Miller, she screamed, voice shrill, face bright red. Get down from there this instant. And what are you wearing? Put on some clothes. I'll be late to class otherwise. Let me off the hook, Louis shouted back, before running the rest of the walkway roof. Rutherford tapped the ash out of his pipe and sighed. He's got so much energy. Maybe we should get him doing magic battles. That brand of mock combat certainly seemed right up Louis's alley. Rutherford still had reservations, though. He had a bad feeling about it that he couldn't shake even in combat class. Louis was bound to cause problems. It was the afternoon after Louis showed off his quick chanting in practical magecraft class and got soaked. He'd just returned to his room after school. There, he found Owen with a bunch of unfamiliar tools laid out before him, a glass pot, a conical cloth bag, and a kettle with a small spout. As Louis wondered if the boy was doing some sort of experiment, Owen stopped and looked at him. Welcome back, he said. Thanks. What the heck is that? Stuff for an experiment? No. These are used to make coffee. My mom sent me some beans, and I haven't made any in a while, so. Coffee? Asked Louis. Oh, that black stuff. Louis knew of coffee, but he'd never had an opportunity to drink it before. To him, the stuff was just black bean soup. I hear it really wakes you up when you drink it, though. He looked back at the items in front of Owen, curious. I like coffee better than tea, Owen went on, his voice quite a bit more cheerful than usual. I only ever make tea when I have guests over. Tea was much more common than coffee in Riddle. The only kind Louis had ever gotten, though, was boiled with cheap leaves and wasn't very good. It was always too bitter. He could only drink it with jam mixed in. What about coffee? Louis turned his chair around, perching on it backward, with his elbow propped on the seat back and his head in his hand as he watched Owen work. Owen first used a mill to grind up the black beans, then transferred the powder to the conical bag and set it inside the glass pot. He'd already filled the kettle with water. Owen put the kettle on a tripod, then chanted, producing a flame. The flame wasn't too strong or too weak, and its strength was stable. Though it was small, it was tricky to keep a flame's power consistent like that. Hey, you're pretty good at magecraft, said Louis. I want to be in the magic corps one day, explained Owen. Louis's eyes immediately widened. The magic corps specialized in combat magecraft. They were an elite group that only the finest mags were selected for. He'd heard that, among commoners, those good at combat dreamed of joining the magic corps, while those who wished to do research sought employment at the Royal Magic Research Institute. I figured you'd want to be a scholar or a researcher or something like that, said Louis. A long time ago, while on a trip, I was caught in a dragon raid. But the artillery mage, one of the 7 sages, saved me. The 7 sages were the best mags in the kingdom. Their magecraft was equivalent to miracle working, and all mags idolized them. Not only that, but the 7 sages were granted a special title, Count of Magic, and it was said that not even the noble assembly could interfere with their business. They also served as advisors to the reigning monarch. You know how they say you can't beat a dragon unless you aim between the eyes? Owen continued. Well, the artillery mage is so strong, he didn't even have to do that. He used magecraft strengthened so many times over that it just blew the creature away. It was amazing. He spoke with a lot of pauses as he focused on maintaining his flame. His voice was as monotone as ever, but Louis could sense a passion within it, quietly simmering just below the surface. That's why I want to be a mage, and strong enough to fight dragons, too. The 7 sages are probably out of reach, so I figured I'd aim for the magic core instead. I'm not from a noble family or a mage family. My mom and dad are cheering me on, though. Owen must have been deeply grateful to his family for supporting his dream of joining the magic corps and for sending him coffee beans like this. Louis knew that the price of an education at Minerva's was high indeed. He wants so badly to be an incredible mage. I must be a real eyesore for him. Louis was aware of his own skills and confident in the hard work backing them up. He had talent, and he strove to further refine it. Nobody else had a right to complain about that. Still, he was inferior to Owen in one aspect. Louis didn't have a clear goal for the future like his roommate did. I mean, I've never even thought about it before. Eating marmalade, outwitting Rutherford, getting good enough grades on his exams to astonish Rosalie, those were all short-term goals. They weren't dreams. While Louis sat mulling this over, Owen extinguished his flame and picked up the kettle. Then he gently poured the hot water over the ground beans in the cloth bag. The beans expanded as they took in moisture and created a light froth at the top. Under the bag, black liquid began to drip into the glass pot. Huh. So that's how you make coffee, said Louis. You don't make it. You brew it, Owen corrected. But it's just bean soup, right? No, it's not. Owen removed the bag and poured the coffee in the pot into a cup. Here, he said, handing it to Louis. Louis's eyes widened. He stared closely at the cup filled with black liquid. Are you sure? Yeah. It's called sharing. Owen had given him marmalade before, and now he was sharing his coffee. Louis couldn't help but feel guilty. As he hesitated, Owen continued in his usual monotone. Just think of it as celebrating your enrollment. Even though it's a month late. All right, then. Let's celebrate. Louis reached over the back of his chair and took the cup of coffee. First, he brought the cup to his face to give it a few whiffs. It didn't smell delicious, exactly, but the scent wasn't bad, either. He blew on the hot coffee a few times, took a sip, then leaned backward. Grah, he moaned. What the heck is this? It's so bitter. Like you took the darkness from the underworld and boiled it. I don't think I made it that strong, said Owen, taking a drink from his own cup and seeming to enjoy it. Owen almost always wore the same sullen expression, but today he looked much more relaxed. Surprised, Louis took another sip of coffee. Still bitter. He went into his desk drawer and pulled out the jar of marmalade Owen had given him. Using a spoon, he scooped some into his coffee. As he took his third sip, his face scrunched up in despair. Nope. Not even jam can fix that. What kind of drink is this anyway? I didn't expect your palate to be so childish. Oh, shut up. He'd put his precious jam in the coffee. He couldn't just leave it. Scrunching up his nose, he drank the rest. His face must have been a sight to see, because Owen, for once, laughed out loud. One early autumn morning, a month and a half after enrolling, Louis stood in the laundry room, arms crossed and a frown on his face. In the dorms at Minerva's, students brought their dirty clothes here to have them washed, then came back the next day to pick them up. But when Louis arrived, he found all his clothes missing, for some reason. Laundry was kept folded in baskets with room numbers on them, so maybe Owen had picked his things up for him. No, Owen didn't have any laundry to pick up today. And besides, when Louis left, he'd told his roommate he was going to get his clothes. If Owen had already gotten them, he would have said something. Which means one of two things: either someone took mine by mistake, or... On the other side of the line of laundry baskets was a middle-aged woman, hard at work. Any idea where my laundry went, miss? What? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't generally pay attention to who takes which basket. Maybe a friend of yours picked it up for you? The woman spoke quickly, glancing at the laundry baskets. Figures, thought Louis, looking back at his already empty basket. You were supposed to place it to the side once you got your clothes. Louis had arrived at a relatively early hour, so not many baskets had been emptied. In fact, there were only 3. And when he saw the room number on one of them, his eyes immediately narrowed. Terrence Abernathy sat on his bed in his dorm, hugging his knees. Bam! Bam! He could hear someone knocking on the door. No, that wasn't a knock. That was someone violently kicking the bottom of it. Terrence's face tensed as he covered his ears. It'll be okay. I'll be fine. If I stay quiet, he'll never know. I'll be okay. The room was locked, and Terrence didn't have any roommates, so he could stay in here as long as he wanted. He could even skip classes for the day. The sound of kicking ceased, and the footsteps grew distant. Nevertheless, Terrence sat perfectly still on his bed for a while longer. Time passed, though he wasn't sure how much. I think it's okay now. He slowly exhaled. As he moved to get off the bed, he heard a rattling at the window. The window, which had been slightly ajar, flew open all the way, shaking the curtains. And there, sitting right on the frame, hey, was the very boy who had once been assigned as his roommate, Louis Miller. This is the second floor. Terrence stammered. Hey. Yeah, not too high. Easy to climb up. Louis squinted his right eye as he sat on the window frame. On his effeminate face, he wore a dangerous, toothy grin that showed his canines. So you were pretending to be out, huh? That means you're guilty. Terrence whimpered and backed away. Why you don't have any evidence? I don't know what you're talking about. Louis got down from the window, lithe as a cat, then grabbed Terrence's collar with the strength of a bear. What? Are you such a kind-hearted noble that you thought you were doing a commoner a favor by throwing out his ragged clothes? Is that it? It was Adolphe. Adolphe asked me to. He said you were being too cheeky and you needed to be reminded of your place. Adolphe hadn't ordered Terrence to do this. He'd asked him to. Adolphe was his friend, so he'd readily agreed. Besides, teaching Louis a lesson would benefit all of Minerva's, that's what Adolphe had said, anyway, and Terrence felt the same. Louis was unfit to be at their school. He was an impurity. Terrence, a noble, had a responsibility to take care of his environment. So where'd you put my uniform? Asked Louis. In, the garbage. Weak. I thought for sure you'd at least burn it, to cover up the evidence, murmured Louis, still grasping Terrence's collar. For a moment, Terrence faintly hoped Louis would let him go. After all, he hadn't burned the uniform, he'd just tossed some garbage into the dump, where it belonged. Right, I'll go get it. But first. Louis dragged Terrence over to the window. Huh? Wait, no, stop. What are you doing? The boy cried out, tearing up. Louis flashed him a dangerous grin. Garbage goes in the dump, right? Then where should I leave a garbage human, you think? As Adolphe Ferron sat in his classroom, happily turning the page of a novel, a classmate, one of his hangers-on, came running in, his face white. Adolphe, it's Terrence. Oh. The dimwit must have messed up, thought Adolphe, thinking no more of it. Terrence seemed to expect things from him, but he didn't expect anything from Terrence. The new kid was probably threatening him as they spoke. The new guy threw him in the cesspit. Now that was a more wicked retribution than Adolphe had expected. Poor people. They do the most vulgar things. Then tell me how a noble would do it. A rough voice with a thick northern accent spoke from behind Adolphe. He turned around in surprise and found exactly who he'd expected, Louis Miller. Adolphe maintained a calm tone and forced a sardonic grin. Shouldn't you have stayed home? Isn't there magic battle class today? Today was the first magic battle class of the year. Adolphe had been training for them since the beginner course, so he was pretty confident in his abilities. Louis had been showing off in practical magecraft class lately, but a little skill in mana control didn't make one accustomed to magic battles. And he couldn't even use barriers to defend himself yet. Louis squinted his right eye at Adolphe's arrogant demeanor and grinned wickedly. Yeah. Can't wait for it. Terrence had gotten Louis angry, so Louis would probably restrict his aim to Adolf during class. And Adolf had already come up with a plan for that. I'll make you regret ever coming to Minerva's, Louis Miller. In the forest, a short distance from the main building, was a training facility used for magic battles. A special barrier set up there safeguarded the people and their environment from any attack magecraft used. To tell the truth, Louis was more interested in that than in the fighting itself. The advanced technique could protect humans from physical damage and deplete a target's mana instead, while also shielding the surrounding trees from harm. And over such a wide area, too. How complicated a formula did that require? They must have dug up the ground and buried a magical item in it. Or more than one, and they're all working together. You probably can't have magic battles just anywhere, but only in certain places. Louis looked around at the other students in line. Magic battle classes weren't mandatory, they were an elective, but more than half of the students here took them. Even if they wanted to go into research, achieving feats in magic battles would work to their benefit when trying to find a job. Rosalie, however, was nowhere to be found, which relieved Louis. You couldn't injure your opponent in a magic battle using magecraft, but he'd heard that combatants still felt pain. Privately, he didn't want her to suffer like that. We will now form teams of 4 and begin the battle, announced a clear voice. It belonged to a woman of around 40 with handsome features. Her blonde hair was tied into a neat ponytail. This was Solo, the magic battle teacher. Standing next to her was an old man with bushy eyebrows, the mage of violet smoke, Gideon Rutherford. Rutherford taught advanced formula application, and while he normally never oversaw intermediate-level courses, it seemed he'd be acting as Solo's aide today. Both teachers wore mage robes over loose-fitting clothing and held high mage staffs in their hands. In Riddle, as the rank of a mage increased, so, too, did the length of their staff. Low mags and apprentices had short ones that reached approximately from their elbows to their fingertips. Middle-ranking mags used ones the length of an umbrella handle or a walking stick. High mags had even longer staffs, though they were still less than the height of a person. Only the 7 sages, at the pinnacle of their craft, were permitted to use staffs longer than they were tall. Louis looked at the 2 teachers' staffs, which marked them as high mags. If I wanted to use one as a blunt weapon, those are pretty much the perfect length. In his eyes, an apprentice's short staff was little more than a twig. Thin, unreliable, only good for poking someone in the eyes. As he was looking at the staff in his hand, mulling over its potential combat uses, a box of paper slips was passed to him. These slips would determine which group a student would join. Louis picked out a folded piece of paper and looked at the number on it. He felt eyes on his back. Someone's watching me. Pretending he didn't notice, he unfolded the paper in front of him, making it easily visible. Several people moved, Adolf Ferren's underlings. Louis stifled a laugh. Looks like I'm in Group 3, he said, as though to himself. Groups 1 and 2 both ran out of time, with no clear winner. In general, it was difficult to actually hit an opponent using attack magecraft. These battles also demanded good judgment. You had to juggle offense and defense, and first-year intermediate course kids weren't quite up to the task. Whenever one person used an attack spell, the others would panic, throw up defensive barriers, and try to flee. And then someone else would fling a spell with terrible aim, causing the others to deploy barriers. It happened over and over again. That was essentially how the 2 fights had gone. You could learn the rules and tactics of magic battles, but putting that into practice was hard. Especially since very few students had been training since the beginner course. The groups swapped out, and Louis, along with the 3 other students in Group 3, stood in a square pattern in a slightly more open section of the woods. Their opponents to either side were about 20 paces away. Adolf was there, standing directly to Louis's left, and the other 2 were most likely his henchmen. Ready, set, begin. Solo's voice rang out, and Adolf and his underlings began chanting. Louis was pretty sure he knew Adolf's plot. He probably wanted to work with the other 2 to teach Louis a painful lesson. So, as soon as he heard the signal to start, Louis ran. First, He went for the one on his right. Before the boy could finish his chant, Louis closed in and kicked him in the stomach. Goo! The boy let out a muffled grunt and fell. As he did, Adolphe and the other one set off an attack spell in Louis's direction, the underling with a flame arrow, and Adolphe. Louis couldn't see what Adolphe had used. Invisible wind blades. He guessed. Their coordination was impressive. The goal was probably to distract him with the flame arrow, then hit him with those wind blades from another direction. That would make it hard for Louis to defend, since he couldn't use barriers. Instead, Louis yanked up the boy he'd just knocked out and started running. "Not so fast," he cried. He blocked the wind blades he couldn't see with the unconscious boy, then ran out of the way of the visible flame arrow. Apprentice-level magecraft didn't have homing capabilities, so if you could see it, dodging it was pretty easy. After getting in closer, Louis flung his makeshift shield to the side and buried his fist in the gut of the boy who had shot the flame arrow. That left only Adolphe, who watched Louis with a baffled grimace. "Are you a moron? This is a magic battle. You're the moron, Adolphe Ferron. If you're up against a mage, why wouldn't you try to shut them up before they finish chanting? It's against the rules. It's unfair." Now that was definitely something a sheltered rich boy would say. Louis cackled, holding his belly. "You want me to beat you up with magecraft, then? Well, don't worry. I've got just the spell for that." Still laughing, Louis burst into a dash. Adolphe's face drew back in terror, but he started chanting anyway, the incantation for a shield-shaped barrier. Once it came up, it was about the size of a kite shield. He sighed in relief. "I made it." "You did." Louis moved around him, then brought the short staff in his right hand close to Adolphe's eyeballs. "Gaia!" Adolphe leaned back so far that he lost his balance. Louis nimbly jumped, then roundhouse kicked Adolphe's huge forehead. The boy's eyes boggled in astonishment as he toppled over backward. Louis landed with the grace of a cat, then chanted the finishing blow. All three enemies were on the ground. Aiming was easy when your targets weren't moving. "This'll do it." Using a quick chant, Louis created a large fireball above his head. He swung the short staff, meaning to slam his spell down toward the earth. Then he noticed the white haze that had appeared around him. Oh, crap. The next thing he knew, his whole body was numb. He couldn't move. The smoke was imbued with a paralytic effect, Rutherford's specialty. Louis's short staff fell from his hand as he crumpled to his knees. He heard the man's voice from overhead. "You little brat," the teacher roared. "Use some common sense, boy." As Louis grunted in annoyance, Rutherford's heel came down on the crown of his head. And that was how Louis's first magic battle came to an end. He'd disabled all three of his opponents in as many minutes, before Rutherford stopped him from finishing them off. "But I used magecraft at the end like I was supposed to," yelled Louis as he was being lectured back in the faculty room. Rutherford promptly slapped him, told him to submit a letter of apology, and ordered him to clean the bathrooms for a month. Stories about how Louis had violently put down Adolphe Ferron and his friends while they were still chanting spread through Minerva's in the blink of an eye. From that day forth, Louis found himself with another nickname. The problem child of Minerva's. It was just as awful as Miller the Jam Hunter, and after he finished writing his apology, he sulked in bed, muttering, "Not another lame nickname."